Lucas Reed had spent years dreaming about this vacation. He had done everything right, worked overtime, saved every extra penny, booked first-class tickets months in advance, and followed every guideline meticulously. This trip was supposed to be his family's reward, their long-overdue taste of something better. But from the moment they stepped inside Westbridge International Airport, Lucas realized their dream vacation was about to turn into something far different. It started subtly. A glance that lasted too long, a polite smile that didn't quite reach the eyes. And then it got worse. Much worse. As Lucas, his wife Claire, and their two children, Maya, age 7, and Caleb, 10, approached the check-in counter, there was a distinct shift in the air. People noticed them, but not in a welcoming way. They stood quietly in line, clutching their tickets, their passports, and the few carry-ons they'd been able to pack with care. Lucas glanced at Claire. She held her head high, her back straight, but he saw the slight tremor in her fingers where they rested on Maya's shoulder. Caleb stood beside him, his gaze fixed on the polished floor tiles. He wasn't looking down because he was tired or bored. He was ashamed, and Lucas felt it like a punch to the gut. But the worst part was that no one seemed to care. The flight attendants sneered as they walked by. Other passengers averted their eyes, as if pretending not to see was better than acknowledging what was happening. Quiet whispers traveled through the crowd, rising above the murmur of rolling suitcases and boarding calls. Lucas could feel their judgment like weight on his chest. What none of them realized, what they couldn't possibly have predicted, was that someone was watching. Someone who had the power to change everything. And by the time this flight landed, none of their lives would ever be the same again. The beginning of the end. Lucas adjusted the worn strap on his duffel bag as he stepped forward in line with Claire and the kids. It was supposed to be a day of excitement. Their first time flying first class. A family trip years in the making. A chance to show the kids that hard work eventually paid off. But as they reached the front of the line, something was wrong. There were several open check-in counters, yet no one called them forward. They stood waiting for nearly 20 minutes as other passengers were ushered through with practiced ease. Lucas raised his hand politely. "Excuse me." His voice was calm, measured. The woman at the nearest counter, her name tag read Heather, a tall blonde in a crisp navy uniform, barely glanced in his direction. Without a word, she turned away and waved forward a young, sharply dressed couple who had just arrived. "Welcome, sir, ma'am." Heather greeted them with a radiant smile, scanning their passports without delay. Lucas exhaled slowly, tightening his grip on Maya's hand. Claire frowned beside him, whispering under her breath, "They're ignoring us." "I see it," Lucas murmured, his tone even, if only for the kids' sake. The line thinned out. Passengers behind them were checked in almost immediately, while the Reeds stood there as if invisible. Every time they seemed next, the agent suddenly found something urgent to do, typing furiously, making hushed phone calls, or turning to whisper with a coworker. Finally, after what felt like an hour, Heather sighed dramatically and waved them forward. "Next," she said, her tone clipped and impatient. Lucas stepped up, handing over their tickets and passports. Heather accepted them like they were an inconvenience. Her eyes flickered over their names before she began tapping away at her keyboard, lips pressed into a line of thinly veiled disapproval. One moment she muttered. Claire crossed her arms. "Is there a problem?" Heather didn't look up. "No," she said curtly, "just verifying something." Lucas exchanged a look with Claire. The uneasy feeling in his stomach grew heavier. 7-year-old Maya tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, why is it taking so long?" she asked softly. He forced a smile. "No reason, sweetheart. Just a little mix-up." After several more agonizing minutes, Heather finally slid their boarding passes across the counter. Lucas reached for them, but she didn't release them immediately. "First class?" she asked, her tone thick with doubt. "Yes," Claire replied firmly, taking the tickets from Heather's grip. "We booked them months ago." Heather hummed under her breath, an almost mocking sound, then turned away before they could say anything else. Relieved, if only slightly, the Reeds made their way toward security. But they hadn't gone far before another airline employee approached. He was a stocky man in his mid-40s, his name tag reading Dennis. "Mr. Reed," Dennis called out. Lucas turned. "Yes." Dennis jogged over with an apologetic expression that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm sorry, but there's been an issue with your luggage." Lucas's stomach dropped. "What kind of issue?" Dennis rubbed the back of his neck. "It looks like your checked bags were sent to the wrong destination. We're working on retrieving them, but might be 24 to 48 hours. Claire's eyes widened. "We won't have our bags for the trip." "I'm afraid not," Dennis said, his tone flat despite the words. "These things happen." Lucas inhaled deeply, fighting the urge to raise his voice. "What about our carry-ons?" Dennis glanced at the small duffel slung over Lucas's shoulder. "That's all you've got, right?" Lucas's jaw tightened. Their extra clothes, toiletries, and even his only formal blazer were in the checked bags. Dennis's indifferent shrug stung more than it should have. "You can always buy what you need when you land," Dennis added with a thin smile before walking away. Claire placed a calming hand on Lucas's arm before he could respond. "We'll manage," she said quietly. They had no choice. Gate humiliation. By the time they reached the boarding gate, Lucas was doing his best to stay calm, but the tension was like a noose tightening around his throat. A flight attendant stood near the gate. Her navy uniform was impeccable, her blonde ponytail tightly tied. Her name tag read Vanessa Dale. When her eyes landed on the reeds, her polite smile vanished. She exchanged a look with a coworker, then picked up the microphone. "Attention passengers," Vanessa's voice rang out, smooth and practiced. "Before we continue boarding, we need to verify some ticketing issues. If you are seated in first class, please have your boarding passes ready." Lucas frowned. No one ahead of them had been asked to verify anything. Vanessa gestured for them to come forward. "Let's start with you." Claire stiffened. "Is there a problem?" Vanessa's smile was thin. "Just a routine check." Lucas handed over their passes. Vanessa took her time examining them, flipping them over as if she were searching for forged details. "First class," she murmured, as if it was an accusation. "That's what the ticket says," Lucas replied evenly. Behind them, the line grew restless. A businessman in a sleek gray suit sighed loudly. Another flight attendant, a brunette named Jenna, stepped forward. "Everything looks fine," but Vanessa cut her off. "I'd like to double-check." Several agonizing minutes later, Vanessa finally handed back their passes. "You're clear. No apology. No explanation." Lucas ushered his family forward, but Vanessa wasn't done. "One more thing," she called out. "Sir, remove your shoes." Claire's breath caught. "What?" "Security procedure," Vanessa replied. "We already cleared security," Lucas said calmly. Vanessa shrugged. "Sometimes additional checks are required." Lucas glanced around. No one else was being stopped. Without a word, he bent down and untied his sneakers, slipping them off. Claire followed, removing her flats, her hands shaking. Vanessa smiled smugly. "Enjoy your flight. First class or second class?" They boarded the plane, but their seats, 2A and 2B, were in terrible condition. The cushions were deflated, the recline button missing. Vanessa appeared at their side, like a shadow. "There's an issue with your seats," she said brightly. 2A won't recline, and 2B's padding is worn out. "Are there other seats?" Lucas asked. Vanessa's grin widened. "First class is full." He had counted at least 3 empty seats on boarding, but Claire placed a hand on his arm. "Let's just sit." The seats were uncomfortable. Claire shifted beside him, trying to ease the pressure in her back. 7-year-old Maya curled up in Claire's lap, hugging her stuffed bunny tightly. "I'd hate for you to be uncomfortable," Vanessa said, leaning closer. "But I suppose you're used to that." Lucas clenched his fists. His son, Caleb, watched him closely. "We'll manage," Lucas said, his voice steady.